Welcome to the Standards Michigan teleconference. Since 2011, we have been following developments in an emergent global standard, ISO 267 facilities management, that responds to the need among organizations, industries, and governments for a leading practice discovery platform for managing safe and sustainable built environments. Today we are hosting a teleconference regarding ISO 267 facilities management with guest speaker James P. Whittaker. Jim is the past chair of the International Facilities Management Association, or IFMA, and president of Facility Engineering Associates, PC. As administrator for the American National Standards Institute accredited U.S. Technical Advisory Group to the International Organization for Standardization Technical Committee 267, Facility Management, IFMA continues its goal of advancing the FM profession. Jim has been a key contributor to IFMA's efforts as the U.S. tag on ISO 267. Today, Jim will be presenting to us an update on the development of ISO 267, including the new work item proposal, which was approved, to begin work on ISO 41001, a management system standard for facility management. By providing specific requirements for individual organizations to establish and manage an integrated MSS for the practice of FM, ISO 41001 will enable an organization to be able to demonstrate that it has a robust process through which to design, manage, and improve its integrated FM system. ISO 41001 would be akin to the well-known granddaddy of them all, ISO 9000 series of standards. Before I turn the call over to Jim, I'd like to first welcome our calling guests. Today we have my colleague, Mike Anthony from the University of Michigan. Hello, Mike. We also have Dan Miller with Alta Resources. Welcome, Dan. And finally, we have Laverne Decker with IFMA. Thank you for attending, everyone. Now I will turn the call over to Jim for his presentation.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks, Mike. I'm happy to be here today. And I'm now showing my screen. So hopefully everybody can now see my first slide. And we're dealing in a lot of acronyms today, and Christine was very good at spelling things out. I probably won't be as good at spelling out ISO TC or tags and all the other things that we deal in day to day, but we are here to do just a brief update on the ISO Technical Committee 267 FM standards. There are 3 standards currently under development in the Technical Committee, and a relatively new work item proposal for a technical report that we'll talk about as well. So first, just real quickly, I want to go back and again, this is well known to everybody, but standards are really the DNA of our society, and there are lots of different kinds of standards. It's a very complex world. I'll be talking today about the ISO standards, specifically guidance or technical standards and management system standards. But these are things that do provide requirements, specifications, or guidelines that we can use to consistently make sure that globally we are utilizing services and have materials, products, and elements that are fit for the intended purpose. So, and specifically, ISO standards have been developed to make sure that services are safe and reliable and of good quality. And that they are strategic tools that look at either minimizing waste or increasing productivity and helping companies access new markets. They allow developing countries to enter in the markets and level the playing field, facilitate free and fair global trade. So with that as the baseline and the premise, why create global FM standards, and what are they all about? ISO publishes well over 20,000 standards. As Christine mentioned, one around, obviously several around quality and various products. The FM standard that we'll be talking about today and the standards are really around a profession or professional discipline, which is a little bit unique in terms of an overall strategic perspective. And why it's important is, if you look back at the profession of facility management, it's relatively new. The built environment has been around forever, for thousands of years, and designing and constructing facilities, infrastructure, standards are very well established. When it comes to a profession or professional discipline and how we operate, how we manage, how we take care, service, and be stewards of the built environment, facility management is a relatively young profession. But it does have a significant impact on productivity of individuals and corporations around the world, as well as security and enhancing quality of life. The one thing that we need is to establish better international standards in the discipline of facility management, an area that we've been lacking for a while. As with a new profession, in fact, when we look at creating the future workforce, you'll find that it's easy as kids go through into high school and college to find the professions of engineering and construction management and technology. But FM is not there. It's not in the books and guidelines for guidance counselors to direct young individuals into college programs or into the profession of FM. And again, because it's relatively new, it's been somewhat fragmented, and people come into the facility management profession from various walks of life. In fact, in the United States, the U.S. Department of Labor standard occupational classification system, there's no FM classification. Actually, the profession falls under General Administrative Services. IFMA has been working for years to change that, to be able to start to understand the profession, to classify it, to start to look at quantitative measures about who is in the profession, how is it working. But to do so, we need international standards. We have associations, we have college degree programs now, we have everything in place other than international standards that are needed to help solidify the profession. So as both Mike and Christine mentioned, the Technical Committee 267 around facilities management was formed in near the end of 2011. Stan Mitchell of BSI, the British Standards Institute, formally welcomed the Technical Committee in February of 2012. And the first Technical Committee plenary session was held in Berlin in November of that year, 2012. Mike Anthony was there at the meeting in Berlin, as several others from the US. The Technical Committee is comprised of member countries that have to participate through their national standards body, or sometimes called a mirror committee. Currently, we have about 38 countries participating in TC 267 in the development of the standards. There's both participating and observing. Participating countries have the right to vote on the various drafts moving forward. Observing countries are there to just provide input, but not have a vote in terms of the drafts moving forward. Just a quick photo. In the bottom photo there, dead center, gray suit, tie, is Stan Mitchell of BSI, who is the chair of the Technical Committee. He's flanked by Olav Sabo to his right, who was one of the work group 2 conveners, and not pictured is the convener for Germany, and now turned over to Jay Drew of the US for the first work group. So we've had great participation over the years in the development of the standards, many plenary sessions, working group meetings across the globe, from Australia to Japan to Europe and the United States. For the US to participate in the Technical Committee, we had to form a ANSI-approved technical advisory group. Currently, we have about 25 or 26 members on the tag for the US, and it's a broad mix of technical experts from universities, from public school systems, from government agencies, from facility service providers, and consulting firms, both public and private, geographically dispersed. Here's just a little word cloud of a number of organizations, institutions that are involved with the ANSI US Technical Advisory Group. You can also participate by being a liaison to either the TAG or the technical committee. And the technical committee has a number of liaisons to other technical committees with related standards. Some of them that obviously asset management, relatively new, ISO 55001 management system standard around asset management, published a couple years ago. We have Stephen Ballasty from Australia, who is our liaison. Casey Martin from the US is liaison to the Energy Management Technical Committee. We have quality management, other liaisons to building construction, security, etc. There's also a liaison to an association, EuroFM, which is actually a federation of facility management bodies, national bodies across the EU. So just real quickly, but not to belabor the process, when I first got involved a little over 3 years ago as chair of the US TAG and looked at the task of developing 2 guidance standards that at the time looking at similar standards. In fact, if I step back and look at the technical committee was formed to develop standards using the CEN, the European Standards Organization, had drafted and published a number of standards for the EU. There were 6 at the time. There's currently 7 standards that are published and now used throughout the European Union. CEN, the European body that oversees the EN 15221 series of standards, proposed to move those into ISO standards through an agreement, and using those European standards as the basis for creating a series of ISO standards. So looking at those, maybe 20, 30 pages in total, each standard, thought this is probably not a big deal. We could craft these pretty quickly. When I was told that this is at least a 3-year process, possibly a 4-year process, I now understand through the ISO protocol that it is a challenge, and it goes through a number of stages. Christine mentioned earlier the NWIP, the new work item proposal, which is the first stage of developing a proposal to submit to the ISO Technical Management Board for approval. If that NWIP is approved, it moves into a technical committee to draft the standards, whether it's a guidance standard or management system standard. The second stage is what they call a preparatory stage, and this is actually creating the working draft, a WD of a standard, that then moves into a committee draft in a committee stage through a working group, crafting that and moving that forward. At this point, the drafts become voting items. So if consensus is reached on a committee draft or a CD, if roughly 2/3 of the technical committee, the voting members, participating members, approve the draft to move forward and no more than 25% object, it will move forward from a CD to what's called a draft international standard in the inquiry stage, which then go through public comment period, review by the mirror committees, national bodies, and again, another vote before it moves to an approval stage, and then a final vote by the participating countries and mirror committees to be published as an international ISO standard. So it is a very rigorous, but meant to be a voluntary consensus standard process with several stages of commenting and voting open to the public to make sure that it is broadly accepted across the globe. So where we are today in the technical committee, we actually started a little bit backwards in looking at 2 guidance standards following CEN standards, the 15221-1 and 2, which were basically part 1, terms and definitions around facility management, and then part 2 being guidance on strategic sourcing and the development of agreements. The European standard was actually titled FM agreements. Our technical committee broadened the scope a little bit by looking at, well, there can be internal service provision or hiring outsourced service providers or out tasking. So we took it up a level to look at strategic sourcing, again, whether it's internal service provision, external, and then the development of agreements. Those first 2 guidance standards followed the SEN standards initially and are really guidance standards. Last year, the technical committee voted to move forward with, at the time, it was a new work item 41,000 for a management system standard for facility management. I'll talk about that briefly. These have been renumbered, but again, I just want to step back. The SEN, the European standards, there were 7 in total, and they had a process. They wanted to define across Europe the terms and definitions, look at sourcing and agreements, quality, taxonomy for the ability to look at the development of standards and data and governance, looking at processes, finally space measurement, all leading to the ability to benchmark facility management across Europe. So what we've done in the technical committee actually started with ISO 18480-1, which is our terms and definitions, and then 18480-2, again, that strategic sourcing and FM agreements. There is now, obviously, there's the ISO 9001 quality and other things. Recently published was an international property measurement standard, voluntary consensus standard done outside of ISO around space measurement, but worked on with a number of associations, including IFMA and RICS, I believe about 30 facilities related associations globally to produce that, all again leading to the benchmarking. The IPMS, the International Property Measurement Standard, was published back in 2013 or 14, I believe, and now continuing to look forward. So the first 2, again, kind of starting backwards because of the SEN process, were the development of the terms and definitions and the sourcing document that have now been renumbered because of the 41,001 management system standard, all to be in that series. So to be consistent with other standards like asset management, like quality, like environmental systems and energy management as well, they will follow ISO 41001, the management system standard. Then terms and definitions will now be 41011, and the strategic sourcing FM agreements will be 41012. So where we are with both the terms and definitions and strategic sourcing, 41011 and 41012, have just moved from CD to DIS approved. So they are now approved draft international standards. Basically in unanimous in terms of the 12 document, only one dissenting vote in the terms and definition coming from France. So both of them moving forward as draft international standards. The proposed timeline is to move into final draft international standards stage by the summertime, and then publication by November of this year. So on track. I think we're very close now, down to kind of wordsmithing and final edits. Where I want to go for just the last few minutes is now talking about really the heart of where we are now today, and the most important aspect is looking at the management system standards. And these are a bit different. And we've created a new working group. It's work group 3. I now convene that work group and heading up the development of 41001. And basically the intent is to produce general requirements for organizational strategy that recognizes different stakeholder groups and serves their distinctly different demands and requirements. The Management System Standard, or MSS, is also there to help us articulate the requirements for an effective and an efficient management regime with the associated policy, process, procedural structures, the right management systems, and the ability to measure performance with performance criteria, and to be accreditable or certifiable in alignment with those requirements. And finally, the Management System Standard is there to provide guidance to achieve benefit from developing and implementing the FM systems requirements, along with the associated performance measurement and continuous improvement. So really, when we look at it, why the Management System Standard was proposed and approved to move forward was really to help us provide specific requirements for organizations, FM organizations, larger organizations, to establish and manage effective integrated management system standards for the practice of facility management. The bottom line being, how can we enhance performance? How can we demonstrate that FM organizations have a robust process through which we can not only design, but manage and improve our management system standards and be the best stewards of the built environment that we can. So currently, we now is the Technical Committee 267. We still have 3 working groups. Work Group 1, overseeing terms and definitions. Work Group 2, that will be finalizing the strategic sourcing FM agreements. And Working Group 3, which is now developing the management system standard. And we've actually broke the WG3 down into 2 task groups, Task Group 1 and 2, looking at breaking out the individual components. So I'll share that with you in just a second. Not to go through all the names and commitment. In fact, when we started the process of the management system standard back in basically July of last year, we had about 19 members in the Work Group 3. Today, we have over 55 members from just about every continent except Antarctica, representing dozens of mirror committees and national standards bodies. Our timeline, our plan is, as we got the proposal actually registered, started in February of 2015. The intent is to have a published management system standard near the end of February 2018. So we're still a couple years away and moving forward now with a detailed schedule following the ISO protocol, just a little graphic, but getting off to a little bit of a late start, but now we've got things rolling in developing a working draft. I want to just real quickly share, there are, out of 20,000 plus ISO standards, there are very, very few management system standards, and some that are kind of common and familiar are these. What we've looked at, obviously 9001 quality management, environmental systems, business continuity, 22301. Then there's again the occupational health and safety, 45001, energy management, and again a relatively new asset management standard, 55001. There's some highlights in yellow in terms of guidance and asterisks. Basically, management system standards are requirement standards that a company can certify to, like an ISO 9001, self-certify, or be in alignment with. Within the past couple years, ISO created a directives document and what they call their Annex SL that harmonizes the format of all management system standards to be published. So the asterisks here indicate which standards, management system standards, have been developed, and I'll share with you in just a second what that format looks like. In addition, they can be standalone requirements documents with separate guidance standards, or they can be combined like the energy management is a combined requirements and guidance standards. Ours, the 41001, was proposed to be requirements with guidance. So we will have both the requirements sections and an annex that provides guidance on how to implement the management system standard. So this is what, when I mentioned that Annex SL in a harmonized format, this is basically now the standard format all management system standards through ISO are published to. 10 clauses, introductory clauses talk about the scope of the standard, references and terms and definitions, and then the real requirements. And these are clauses 4 through 10 that are now aligned, looking at the context of the organization, the structure, as well as leadership, developing policies, planning, support, looking at resources needed. Clause 8 is the big one around operations. This is the key to how you will really implement the management system standard. And then clauses 9 and 10 look at measuring the performance and a continual improvement process. All of these management system standards follow the kind of internationally recognized Plan, Do, Check, Act model that, again, now makes it a little more straightforward and concise to follow that process all the way through. So this is the ISO consolidated directives with the Annex SL that provides the basic structure for the management system that we have in place. So where we are now, ISO 41001, we are in a working draft stage, putting the content to both the requirements clauses and the annex for the working draft. We're hoping to have a really good working draft in place for our second face-to-face meeting in Melbourne, Australia in early June of this year, to hopefully then sometime in the summer move forward with a committee draft that would be able to go out to all of the participating and observing countries for comment and voting to continue to move it forward. So that's a very high level look and update of what it is, where we are. I really wanted to, hopefully it was kind of quick and hitting the high level to be able to open it up for discussion and questions, and there's a lot of content there, and you may have more questions than answers, but hopefully that has stimulated some good thought process.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was an excellent presentation and overview of the standard. And in particular, I think not only from a content of the standard point of view, but really more importantly, the process that you must engage in order to advance a standard. So that was tremendously helpful and interesting. And what I would like to do at this time is open it up for any Q&A or any further discussion. Perhaps we can take the next 10 to 15 minutes before we close out the call to open it up for discussion. Feel free to chime in or raise your hand in the chat box, whatever you prefer.
This is Mike Anthony. I think I would defer to our guest, Dan Miller. I think he's muted right now, though. Dan, are you able to hear us? You're welcome to chime in. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, one question I have is, well, first of all, this is new for me, so this is very good. I've been a member of IFMA on and off for a number of years, but really want to get a better understanding of what is going on in facilities management. That's why I kind of asked to do a little more digging in this area. Is there a standard for operations and maintenance in somewhere in IFMA?
Good question, Dan. IFMA does not publish, and it has not published an operations and maintenance standard. In fact, it's very interesting. I also work with, we've created a standards committee that Laverne Deckert, who is online as well, also administers. So Laverne is becoming an expert in this area as well, whether she wants to admit that or not. And we've been looking very hard at what we do there, Dan. And I think you raise a kind of a larger issue, and I'll answer your specific question in a second. But we've also looked, and just recently I published an article looking at the complexity of compliance. And when you go across the borders, not just in the US, but globally, ISO standards are one aspect. We have ethics standards, we have business standards around SOX and GASB and FASB, et cetera. Hundreds and hundreds of technical standards from other standards developing bodies, whether it's regulatory like ICC, and I know Mike and Christine follow a lot of these, ICC and ASHRAE and ANSI and ASME and ASTM, publishing a lot of good technical standards to specific areas. IFMA has been more in the professional development side as opposed to standards development. So they have courses in operations and maintenance as part of their FMP credentialing and CFM credentials. And within those, they, because I teach those courses as well, and we reference a lot of those kinds of standards. There are best practice documents around operations and maintenance, some from government agencies like Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and others that publish their own standards, GSA, on O&M guidelines or best practices. ASHRAE has a couple of standards, but they're more specific around maintenance practices for things like HVAC equipment. They don't, there's so many technical standards around specifics, around building automation systems or HVAC systems or elevators, but nothing around the organization in developing an O&M program. Again, lots of standards and the pieces and components, but nobody's put it all together. So now we've moved to a higher level with ISO, looking at a management system standard for an FM organization that would include, but not be limited to, O&M standards within an organization, but how you tie to business continuity, how you look at strategic planning, how you look at client relations and service, et cetera, and environmental health and safety, and all of the aspects that you have to integrate in to be able to do that. So the hope is that we take it to this higher level to create a framework, to create that ability to now consolidate or at least better reference all of these other technical standards and be able to get to the information that had been difficult to get at in the past. So Dan, I apologize. I know that was a long answer to your question around O&M standards specifically through IFMA, but there's not. And that's where we need to be able to get to. But first, we need this framework. We need to organize it to be able to do that.
Jim, can I?
Okay.
I'm sorry, Jim and Dan. Christine has a 2 o'clock appointment, and I wanted her to have a few. I'll carry on with the call until 2 o'clock, but I thought I'd give Christine a chance for some final words before she runs off to her 2 o'clock.
Did you want me to do
the closing? No,
closing?
I'll have some quick.
You'll take care of that?
Yeah, I'll do the closing part. There looks like there's a lot more here to talk about. So any thoughts of yours before you head off to your next appointment?
Just to reiterate that I think understanding the process of standards development and what it takes to advance a new standard or a management system standard in particular is very interesting and very educational. And I think that part of the challenge that we have found at Standards Michigan, in order to get engagement from facility managers, they at a minimum need to have an understanding of what this process is all about. I think that is what gets in the way sometimes, whether it be time or resources for this type of activity. The reality is many facility managers have had very little exposure to the standards development process. So I just want to commend Jim on all the work that he's been doing in this regard, because it clearly is a specialty that not very many people have. So with that, I think I will say Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for coming together. And I will make my exit, and Mike will take over the call at this point.
Thanks very much,
Thank
Christine.
you.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Whenever we deal with standards, we're always asking who the enforcement authority might be. Near the end of this call, we'll cut over and give other people on the call an idea of what the specifics are that we deal with. We actually deal with it from the other side. And in my mind's eye, I'm always thinking of a clamshell, where this is the larger management standard, and then we're dealing with the specifics that Dan asked about. Anyway, what the specifics whistle by pretty much by the hour. But getting back to my original question about compliance enforcement authorities, are capital markets enforcing this? And I'll ask it in a different way. Is this a condition for capital to move from point A to point B? And when I use the example of the International Code Council, NFPA, and the other standards developers, most of their revenue, frankly, is in the enforcement part of it. And something won't happen unless you conform to the standard. And that's where most of the revenue is. I like to say that standards are really the seed corn for enforcement or compliance revenue. So I'm getting back to my original question. Who would enforce a standard? And I'm thinking that capital markets like ISO 9001 here in Detroit, Michigan, we're aware that our auto manufacturers wanted to work globally. And so in order to work globally, they needed to be able to benchmark performance, products, deliveries, compare apples to apples. So they needed ISO 9000 so they could execute global trade. Now, I guess ISO 9000 came out in the middle 80s, that the markets themselves seem to enforce it as a precondition. Your management system must conform to a standard, and if you don't, money won't go in your direction. So that's a fairly elaborate question, and I hope there's enough holes in there that you can pick a piece of it and just to answer my question generally about enforcement compliance.
Yes, Mike, I think I can. It is, and in fact, some of the largest drivers we see is, and maybe even stepping back in terms of looking at the facility management profession globally, still one of the biggest trends is a drive to outsourcing and consolidation and a lot of volatility in global service providers working in large capital markets. So global corporations, whether it's utilities, global IT, the Microsofts, the Apples, the Googles, etc., even auto manufacturing companies, but global real estate corporations as well, have been struggling. And when you look at, I think a lot of folks, when you think about the Jones Lang LaSalle's and the CBREs, the ISS, the ABMs, lots of large global service providers managing real estate portfolios worldwide, are driving the standards development because they see huge variations in service level and the need to make sure that capital is not only moves but is understood in the right markets and that there's consistency. We've even government agencies, folks like the State Department that manage embassies across the world that have large local engaged workforces in basically every continent, struggle to see consistent levels of the delivery of services. And they're very keenly interested. There are the OMB circulars that drive government agencies in the U.S. to utilize, whenever practical, voluntary consensus standards as a basis. So, governments both in Europe, but also the drive to emerging markets like China and India, Asia Pacific, there's a huge need to make sure that we've got good global standards in place as we see in just a massive global growth in those areas from Middle East onward. So there's lots of drivers. In terms of the enforcement, again, the ISO these are voluntary consensus standards. So it's entirely, and there are different modes. You have 3 ways of utilizing an ISO management system standard. You can get an independent third-party certification where you have, and it's not an ISO body. So ISO makes their money in the publication of the standards. They don't actually do enforcement. Enforcement is through standards bodies like ANSI, ANAB, ASQ, BSI, others around the world that will actually certify companies to the ISO standards like 9001, 22301, etc. You can also self-certify by utilizing the standard, the management system standard, or just be in alignment with. If you even purchase the standard and say, okay, let's go through this, let's do whatever is practical. Certification holds the highest level okay, we can now say that we are certified to 9001, and that does drive capital when it comes to manufacturing and in parts and pieces. When it comes to services, probably a little less relevant or a little less direct or clear in how that's done. But I think you'll see that large capital markets from commercial real estate and the need for more consistency in the delivery of services globally for more and more emerging global markets is helping to drive these standards. And those large international service providers are very, very interested coming on board early to say, yeah, they're going to be very interested in certifying to these standards to help drive business to that market.
So could we imagine a real estate investment trust saying on its contract for outsourcing facility management as a criteria for a cash flow compensation that your organization shall conform to 18480 or to ISO 267? Is that what we might visualize? Because you'd mentioned there's different ways to comply. We've heard of all those, but when it comes down to real dollars, the fastest way is and I'll use the comparison of a building inspector who says you shall not enter that building until these things are done. And there's a great core of well understood core of individuals who then rally to get the built environment, the building up to the benchmark that the building inspector has established. So I'm visualizing that at some point this might be part of a contract of real estate investment trusts farming out, or as part of its contract in its quid pro quo with its as a condition for capital allocation, that this might be the a reference document, a foundation for comparing apples to apples and a performance criteria. Am I visualizing the importance of that correctly, or at least in some outcome that you might see originate from this?
Absolutely. That is the intent long term. It certainly takes a while to get there. But even now, there's a huge interest globally to the asset management system standard, which, you look, okay, well, what's the difference between asset management and facility management? And we could debate or have, discussions around it. But to me, asset management is a part of what many FM organizations do and need to do. And again, globally, you're seeing, large airport authorities saying, yes, we want to have vendors providing services to our airport that are certified to the asset management standard. And I think that's the goal with the FM management system standard, because it does integrate a lot of things, and it does give you that comfort that, okay, who we are hiring to be the stewards of our facilities, whether they're government, and I think we see this in Europe much more so than we do in the United States these days, is that outsourcing model growing in the need for standards to kind of combat that complexity. So they're very strongly and keenly interested in looking to that to say, yes, we are, whether it's REITs, whether it's large owners of properties or even government agencies, saying, yes, we're looking for not only individuals that are competent to do this, but organizations made up of competent individuals that have the management system in place that ensures minimizing risk, ensures compliance and efficient operations. So that's definitely the long-term goal.
Could you imagine this being adopted by states, for example, that allocate or redistribute education facility money? Let me back up again. Our industry, at least the education facilities industry, is roughly 1/3 higher ed. The other 2/3 is frankly K-12. And there's a lot of discussion about the unevenness of the facilities in K-12 schools. And a lot of that, for obvious reasons, I don't want to get into a political discussion. But to have a benchmark, what would prohibit the use of an international standard by state governments as a performance criteria for allocation of school operation and maintenance funds?
Certainly nothing would prohibit it. And again, I think that's the intent. When it gets there, it does take a while. And I think your example is great, because when you look at, I think one other way of looking at this is K-12 school systems or independent school districts across the country. In fact, every state in the U.S. is either currently or within the past 10 years undergoing lawsuits regarding equitable distribution of funding to schools. Whether it's big school systems or small school systems, there's a huge inequity in many eyes, and there's a lawsuit to prove it, that say we are not taking care of our schools to provide the right environment for kids to learn, and that obviously hits home. So it's something like these, the international standards being adopted and understood how they can help validate or verify that level of competency in systems approach to say that, yes, school systems or service providers, whatever the case may be, have the means, have the systems, the policies in place to best manage our schools and provide equity in how they are managed. And again, I think eventually that recognition is going to get there. There's a lot that needs to be done before we get there, but states would be a prime area, especially when you start looking at even higher ed compared to K-12 and other facilities. It is now driving to, how do we know that our facilities are being taken care of in an effective and efficient process, and that we are taking care of taxpayer dollars. And this is one way of doing that. Now, there are going to be critics that say, look, I think standards are there to all they do is make things harder and add complexity and cost to something. But just the awareness and the understanding of how we can be better at managing facilities and having the performance measures to show that and continuously improve through a systematic approach is going to be very important. And when we can start doing that and showing the results, I think it's going to be a lot easier sell to be able to get there.
Okay, great. Well, we're coming on to 2 o'clock here. I have a technical requirement. Our video guy will say, Mike, try to keep it under an hour. So out of deference to him, we still have about 6 minutes before I have to run off to log on to another teleconference. I did want to answer some of Dan's question by cutting over to my screen, but I didn't want to cut over to my screen until you think you've said everything you'd like to say here.
You are good.
Jim.
Go ahead and I can, yep, you can cut over.
Yeah.
Take control back and.
Okay, now I have to find you again. Somewhere on my, there you go. All right, so I'll take it over, and I think I'll cut over to Dan's page very quickly here. So give me a moment, and I am going to make myself the presenter again. And we'll go over to Dan's page. I'm going to answer Dan's question very quickly, but he did ask something about operation and maintenance. Do you want to refine your question a little bit, Dan, and then I can come back, and I think I have a partial answer for you. Yeah,
so it's going to be similar to asset management, where you're going to be tracking all of your assets, and that's kind of a can of worms too, because how granular do you want to get? But in the operations and maintenance, bringing that information together from asset management as well as the information from the manufacturer as far as how that equipment or that asset is maintained and the life expectancy costs and everything else that goes into that, so that a facility has a roadmap from cradle to grave. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned granularity, so I will show you what granularity looks like. This is our website, and we look at, well, if you just stay here every day, we try to present a standard that is a commentable standard. Or a part of a standard. We receive, I say it's about 1 per hour. It's probably more than that. We believe that there's 10 million different pieces of regulation that are coming out of various forms of government and even the markets, and so we try to capture that which is important to us. So what you'll see here is we try to respect all the standards developers, and we try to give them a little bit of airtime on our website. You can see that we're dealing with the generators, we're dealing with ICT, we're dealing with over Christmas, Easter. There's a lot of. It turns out that there's a lot of churches in higher education that you might not have thought about, but so that's what we're. That's what we do, and we have. If you go to our website here, we think we've been successful. We know we've been successful. This is our. This is what we go into the excruciating detail where many do not want to go, and we do it at a very high rate. So you can see some of the changes we made for ourselves, but of course that has a benefit to everyone else in the industry. And so I'll encourage you, if you want to see what we do on our, a little more specific about the specifics we believe that we've mastered. I like to say that discipline, speed, results. You can look at our annual report to see this will be replaced soon. But that's kind of what we do in the operations and maintenance area, and we do it at a very high speed. And as best we can tell, we do more of it than anybody. And so we follow all standards. This is not the only international standard we follow, but this is an important one. And I think Jim has illustrated the possibilities here for solving a management problem that is not going away. So that's kind of it. Laverne's been kind of quiet.
Well, and Mike, if I could real quickly add to that, and Dan, again, great example. You think of asset management and just the migration of assets and what level of granularity. I mean, you think of even from new design with these days BIM and Revit, and you've got IFC standards, you've got COBE standards and protocol, and all the BIM standards and CAD standards that migrate into systems to be able to manage the assets. And those CAFM and CMMS and IWIMS, we have OSCAR standards around space and FICM standards and other things, but then you get to, okay, you've got now all your CSI uniformat and master format standards that classify buildings and nomenclature. And then you've got to associate PM procedures, whether it's through NFPA or ASHRAE or RS Means or Whitestone or all the other standards that say, how do you operate, manage, maintain these systems? And then you look at the code side, there's actually, and very few people from FM perspective know that through the International Code Council, there is an International Property Maintenance Code, IPMC, that talks about, again, high level, and it's enforceable now. I think well over half the states across the US have adopted and now enforcing the International Property Maintenance Code that basically says you shall maintain facades and HVAC systems and security systems and not block egress routes and so forth. And now, all the NFPA standards come into play. So you've got dozens and if not hundreds of those detailed standards that come into play just when you're looking at, okay, how am I going to manage assets? What do I call them? What level of granularity do I need to go to? Do I capture every smoke detector in the building, every sprinkler head, or I go to a system level, etc.? That's where it becomes really complex. And there's nothing out there that says this is how you tie all those things together. But that's where we need to go.
Right, and that's exactly where I want to get to, with Alta is where do I go to get the resources in order to put a plan together so that it makes managing the facilities easier and more efficient?
That's your ball, Jim.
Well, and I since you asked Laverne, we've scheduled a codes and standards workshop at some point through IFMA.
We have. So when we go to San Diego for our World Workplace Conference, and Dan, I'll send you that information, but we do have a one-day workshop that Jim is going to be the instructor of on code standards, and I'll send you kind of the blurb on that and information for registration and things.
So while you're there, Jim, I need code writers and vote getters.
Yes.
A code writer and a vote getter is a little bit of a lawyer and a little bit of an engineer. I could hire a lawyer who will then retain an engineer, or I could hire an engineer who will retain a lawyer. This ungainly hybrid that I visualize needs about 120 hours a year. And he's got to put his nose to the grindstone and get into the syllables, the DNA, as you say, of these codes and standards. There's no substitute for it. We don't get results until we dive into the syllables. Everything else is just gloss. And I frankly get fed up with it. So I want to see if you can put a pitch out there if any organization wants to support somebody like that. I'd be happy to receive him in our little merry band of mercenaries, code mercenaries, so to say, or code writers and vote getters. It's a very unprosaic term for somebody who actually, who can stay with an idea for 6 to 12 years. And then when they're successful, they move about 10 billion. They move about 10 billion. If you can find that person or persons for us, please send them our way.
We will see what we can do.
Yeah. So, it looks like it is 2 o'clock. I've really enjoyed this. I hate to close this, but there are other things to do today. I'm sure you have that too. So on behalf of Christine and the University of Michigan, I'm very grateful for your time. And